order the study session for the Arvada City Council on today, February 10th, 2025.
So we have our housing team here this afternoon. I know that Carrie Espinosa is going to kick us off, but we have two subjects to talk about. The first one will be recommended changes to the bylaws for the Housing Advisory Committee. And then the second one will be a workforce development idea that we want to share with you as well. So welcome, Carrie.
Thanks, Linda. I believe everyone received a copy of the memo and the draft housing bylaws. We'll review the bylaws first. And so just to give a bit of background, I know that you all have the memo. But at the January 6th City Council business meeting, the city team presented recommendations for revisions to the Housing Advisory Committee. And during that discussion, it was recommended to us that we remove the term affordable from the Housing Advisory Committee bylaws, thus opening it up to all housing types. So Sam and I came back and we were trying to determine the best strategy in order to do so. And I feel like we've come up with a very good option that we wanted to run past you tonight before we bring it to you for recommendation of adoption. But to give you a bit of background, what we're recommending is that we remove the term affordable from the bylaws, but instead we include in the scope of the bylaws that the purpose of the Housing Advisory Committee is to work on the needs identified in the housing needs assessment. Per new legislation that was approved, the city must complete a housing assessment every 6 years, meaning that the priority areas of the Housing Advisory Committee, they'll be reviewed on a regular basis, which I think will show that we are committed to making sure that the advisory committee continues to meet the needs of the community. So we wanted to run that past you today to see what your thoughts are on removing the term affordable, but including in the scope that the Housing Advisory Committee will follow the needs identified in the most recent housing needs assessment that's completed.
I've been giving this some thought, and I guess I go back to the question of why we're removing affordable. When we set up the committee, and I appreciate the memo, you know, we intended it to look at affordable housing. We had set up members to participate in the committee that had expertise in that. And, you know, the housing needs assessment says we need to be looking at affordable housing. And we said the Housing Advisory Committee is to look at what the needs assessment says is the highest need. So I don't really understand why we're removing affordable.
Sharon, go ahead.
So in terms of affordability, I understand that what's affordable for me is different than what's affordable to you. So I like housing affordability and then the needs assessment for that. I guess that the definition of affordable is so broad and it's personal from person to person on what is affordable. So I think housing affordability and the ability to purchase a home within Arvada, according to the needs assessment, will tell us at what levels will we need homes. Do we need homes that are in the $400,000 to $500,000 range and so forth? Right now, people aren't budging from their homes. When we say that the average home is $400,000, I'm just pulling a number out of the sky. It might not be $400,000. But the people who are living in those homes that are $400,000 are not moving. So unless we build more homes at the $400,000 range, you know, the housing affordability doesn't change because builders are going to build according to the market. We can ask them to build homes in a range that some groups can afford, and I certainly do appreciate that because I know that there are developers out there that are willing to do that and are eager to do that in Arvada. So I think that removing the affordable from the rules is appropriate. And then really honing into and leaning into the housing needs assessment that is required by the state will tell us what kind of housing we need. Is it existing? That'd be great, but the houses that are in my neighborhood for $500,000 are being sold to developers and they're flipping them over like pancakes at $700,000, so I can't even afford to live in my $500,000 home. So those are the things that I think we need to meet Arvada's identified needs are really important. And then that makes this more evergreen than just leaving in the word or the phrase affordable housing. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I was gonna say that the definitions also differ from agency to agency. Like the federal government, HUD's definition is different than what Jeffco says is affordable housing. And then you also have definitions of like what is workforce housing. And so I think this will give the Housing Advisory Committee some flexibility about different needs at different times with those different types of housing. I don't think it's ever gonna be like the housing needs assessment's gonna be like, there's not enough multi-million-dollar houses in Arvada. How can we subsidize those homes with taxpayer dollars, right? I don't think that's ever gonna come out of a needs assessment. Like the most recent needs assessment was like starter homes are really hard for people to find in this. People who make 90% AMI or lower are having difficulty finding housing, but rental housing has kind of stayed about the same with the increase. So now we know, okay, we don't need to increase affordable rental housing, right? We need to figure out the starter homes and the workforce and like the stuff where people are kind of caught in a donut because the average house price in Arvada is actually $650,000. And if you are making, yeah, I bought my house for 310, so same. But if you are at 100% AMI, that is really hard for you to be able to afford, right? So it helps, it gives us flexibility to look at the housing needs assessment. I think it's kind of like with roads, we're not just saying like every single road has to be paved, no matter what the condition of the road is. Like we have an assessment of like, this one has potholes, it's been so many years since this, then we're gonna, and we have a prioritization. So I think basing it on the needs assessment will help us prioritize the priorities of the Housing Advisory Committee.
And I think we have, okay, are you sure, John? Thank you. I also think that we have to move past first-time home buyers because we are the second fastest aging community in the metro. I would like to see something where I don't have to walk down 17 stairs to get to my washer and dryer and then carry everything back up the stairs. So that's part of the housing needs assessment too, where I can afford, if I sold my house, to move into a lateral movement into a one-story something or other in an active over 55 community where I can still go running and play. I know, we need those. We need them.
We do.
And so,
One right over by Oberon Junior High. Brand new, just got built in the last couple of years.
Not many for ownership.
yeah, so.
Those are for ownership.
Good, that's good to know.
So that's, that when I think of a needs assessment, that's what I think is included in a needs assessment.
So I think I started this whole thing with the affordable. The problem to me is, what's affordable? What's the definition of affordable housing? Because I think affordable is used as an ultimate euphemism for subsidized housing. And, I'm not sure I want this committee to be just worrying about subsidized housing. How do we subsidize more housing? How do we get more subsidies to build more subsidized housing? How do we manage subsidized housing? I think I would rather see this committee look at housing in Arvada in general. And I'm okay with these revisions, except for the membership, has 2 different members on there listed as, Arvada resident advocate for affordable housing. I think you ought to just define that accurately. Let's try not to use euphemisms. They ought to say, Arvada resident advocate for subsidized housing, if that's what you mean. And if that's not what you mean, I would just take the word affordable out of there, and it ought to be an Arvada resident advocate for housing. Okay, because I think the public, once they pay attention a little bit, they go, oh, I see what this means. You're fooling me with this stuff. We say workforce, we say attainable, we say affordable. The reality is there's two kinds of housing. There's subsidized housing and there's not subsidized housing. And I would, most everybody who rents in Arvada, who rents at what would be thought of as a bottom of the market, lower the market rate, are not subsidized. They're not subsidized and their rental's not subsidized. I'd love it if our housing committee were to start recognizing some of this and start talking about and making recommendations to the council. Here's some things you can do to help preserve this naturally occurring housing at lower prices. Well, if we use the word affordable to mean subsidized, this committee is going to work wholly on subsidizing more housing. Well, that leaves out the bulk of the housing that people can afford in Arvada. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I'd rather see this committee involved in all of it. And let me just give you an example. We're going to be approving building codes here coming up sometime this year. Well, those building codes are going to contain in them all kinds of things that are optional for us. We can accept them as is, or we can adopt them in the form that we want. I would love to have a bunch of housing advocates in Arvada who would look at these proposed building codes as they're coming up and say, that recommendation that everything gets sprinklers in it, that makes things cost more. And from my perspective, I prefer it if people have lower priced housing. I would recommend you don't do that. Or whether it's some insulation code or energy efficiency code, or I know, Jessica, I'll let you speak here in just a second. I know what you're gonna say. And we have a building code advisory group to speak to some of those issues, but they speak to those issues from a different perspective. And the housing people can speak to some of those issues from a housing perspective. And so I think it's always been a problem to have a housing committee that is only interested in how do we subsidize more housing or attract more subsidized housing or re-subsidize housing that can get remodeled and stay subsidized or whatever, without at least being honest about what we're doing.
First of all, I don't share your interpretation of what affordable means, but the fact is that if people are out there carrying that definition around with them, that's already a problem. I share what a lot of comments are, and that is that we need to focus on the whole housing stock, because I think we're missing housing in different places, not just those that are within whatever definition of affordable you want to use. The other thing is that part of the problem with us missing places in those areas are the regulatory issues. It's simply not profitable to build a house for sale almost anywhere, but certainly not in Arvada, without spending $100 or a foot before you have a shovel in the ground. I mean, the regulatory requirements, the taps, all the things that go along with it, make it virtually impossible to build housing profitably at the low end. And if you're a developer, you're in business to make a profit. You're going to make more of a profit if you use every square foot that you can and you build it for a higher market. We need to know what those influences are, and we should have a committee that studies all of that, not just a target. And so while I appreciate the history of the committee arising from the need for affordable housing, I think a bigger picture is absolutely appropriate.
I agree. I think that the housing committee can help us understand all of the outside issues, like you said, the tap fees, thus and such, and the fire code and that type of thing that goes into consideration of building a home. And if you leave those things out and we short shift to make the home affordable, you can get unsafe, those types of things. And And bottom line, yeah, like you said, you haven't even put a shovel in the ground, it's $100 a square foot. Now you gotta buy lumber and concrete, which is.
I would actually like to speak to another thing, and that is that I'd love it for the survey to dig in and give us a little more detail. I did a little Zillow skulking and figured out, okay, where's the affordable housing using the definition of a percentage of our average. So our average is 52. Cut that in half or cut it however you want, and you end up with someone that is going to pay essentially $1,000 a month for housing, if it's an individual.
Unless there's two of them.
If there's two of
They
them,
pay 2,000 a month. and
Then you're
it's
paying-
everywhere, right?
right. And I'd like to know of the stock that we have, how old is it? Because if you look at some of the photos that are associated with those ads, we know where they are and the condition they're likely to be in. So I think it would be informative of us to have that kind of information. And we wouldn't get it if we're only focusing on one little slice of the pie.
Brad, you bring up a really good point. As long as we define that, we're gonna try to provide housing for people to spend no more than 30% of their gross income and live by themselves. I didn't live by myself till I was in my 30s because I wasn't affluent enough to do so. If we go make that our strategy, we're gonna make it where somebody who earns $42,000 a year can live by themselves in the average place in Arvada. That's impossible. We can't do that. But you can take two people who both earn minimum wage and only work full-time, not extra at all. And they can live all over Arvada as long as there's two of them. And they can be, a couple, or they can be roommates. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways of doing it. But I think it's a definitional problem in large part. Now, there's plenty of people who need and deserve their housing to be subsidized because they may be elderly, they may be handicapped, they may be, heading up a household with children, that kind of thing where they've got limitations. But I think those definitions are very, very tricky. And again, it's discussion. I'd love to see a housing advisory committee in good faith talk about that kind of stuff. And instead of, just adopting this notion that anybody who has a job can spend 30%, should be able to spend 30% of their wages and live by themselves. At no time in the history of this country has that ever been possible.
Jessica, did you want to weigh in real quick? So you're jumping over there.
Just want to make sure everybody's had a chance. I don't want to
I can
interrupt.
wait.
Okay, thank you. I just want to point out that when the building codes do finally make their way to the city council, they will have first made their way through the building code advisory board. That group is the one that is going to be weighing all of the various issues. They also will be challenged with the task of having to balance new state law requirements and which codes we're going to be compelled to adopt and which ones we can make amendments to. I also just want to point, so anything about sprinklers or cost of new energy, all of those things, we're going to be really trying to vet that through the building code advisory board, which will then come back before the city council. I just want to point out that it can take months and months and months for the building code advisory board to work through the various permutations of code that are going to be coming up. That's not really a role for the HAC. They're not building contractors. They're not building experts. What they can do is inform us about the things that they have concerns about, which overall is going to be cost, affordability, all of those issues. We have to take that into account, but we also, don't have the luxury, I think, of being able to necessarily say, we're only going to do this and we get to ignore all of this, because state law is going to, frankly, it's going to mandate us to adopt one suite of codes. And we'll be coming back to you in time with that. We still have a little bit more research to do. The other thing I just wanted to point out is that the Planning Commission is also, there and situated and understands the role of the Land Development Code, which does deal with everything that has to do with housing. So if there are any questions that the City Council has, interest that you have about any particular topic, we can also run it through the planning commission. You know, they're here to provide guidance and recommendations to the city council so you can make decisions. And we're happy to have things vetted through them. But again, some of these issues, you know, I know that the topic came up before about gated communities. Those are things that our land development code can address. I don't think that the hack is equipped to address that because they don't really know the full scope of our code. And so I just want to make sure that we put these in the right places and put the right people in front of it, understanding that this is my work system. So I'm kind of tasked with making sure that there's continuity between the different types of things that we're going to be looking at. And most importantly, what comes back to the city council. So that's really, I work with all the managers to make sure that we're filtering things through that lens, making sure that what we do is appropriate. So nothing is being ignored by the hack. If the hack isn't tasked with it, the planning commission is, or the building code advisory board is. So I just wanted to make sure, because I know there's a lot of committees, a lot of boards that do a lot of things.
Like this or like this?
I'm sorry.
The committees, are they like this? Or are they like this?
The building code advisory board, I think they meet very infrequently. The real purpose of the advisory board is let's say a contractor comes in and they disagree with what the building official has said in terms of installing a certain piece of equipment. And they say, no, I don't agree with you. And I think that the building code actually reads it this way. And the building official says, no, I see it as this way. The building code advisory board is tasked to be able to look at the code and interpret it and say, you're reading it right, you're reading it wrong, go back. They're also tasked with any types of codes or policies that we're going to be implementing, that they're really that sounding board. So they don't meet that frequently, and that's because we also don't adopt building codes that often. And thank goodness we also have a really good building official that interprets our code really well, and so we don't get a lot of claims against them. But what we will do, and also with the building codes that are coming up, we have to talk with a number of groups: City Council, Planning Commission, and Building Code Advisory Board, and the community. So we're going to be talking with everybody about that and helping them understand. I wish building code was easy, but it is so complicated. I know for you guys have been through this. I think you went through the 2018 codes. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. We're going to have a couple of sticking points, but ultimately, if the sticking point is sprinklers, we're going to know what the Housing Advisory Committee thinks about those. So.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Jessica. That's super helpful. One request I have when building advisory comes forward, particularly in regards to the state mandates, is what is going to be the financial impact to the city for implementation of the state's mandates, both in terms of your team's time, what that cost to capital, because if you guys are doing X, that means you're not doing Y, and it delays all of the other projects. So, and then if we have to make, infrastructure investments into certain parts of the city to meet infrastructure needs, et cetera, just all of that will be helpful to us in determining, how we're moving forward with all of that.
Will do. I think maybe I'll just say building code for another day. It's not as dire as it sounds in terms of.
Sounds good.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So since I'm the one who proposed this committee, maybe I should give some background. The purpose, and if you look at the makeup of it, it's intentional. And Lisa was a big push behind this, and I always defer the credit to her. But the reason that makeup was put there was not just to talk about affordable housing. It was to talk about sustainable housing. It was to talk about housing types. And it was very clear that gated community was put in there because we have a spectrum of housing demands. In fact, the reason I brought up, and code aside, you got to put code aside. We struggled with our first time having a gated community proposed. We didn't know what that meant. We didn't know what that means. We didn't know how sidewalks are going to work, how does snow removal work, how do police get in. We've never had such a thing ever done. And is it something we should even allow? Because at one point, the city, it's a policy decision if we want those in our cities. We didn't have any sounding board to put that back on. The other question was tiny homes. Should we have more tiny home communities? Is that something we should be looking into? It's not always affordable. It's just housing stock type. It was never this. I'm a little disappointed on that this has been kind of going down this whole affordable thing, because that's not the spectrum we agreed on when we created this committee. We purposely put, yes, an affordable housing developer. We were looking for a developer that specializes in it because they could talk about light tech credits, We brought in urban renewal, see if there's a partnership between a developer and urban renewal. We did want to have a resident advocate for housing. We also wanted to know who was the resident benefiting off of any of the Section 8 housing, to be very clear of which group we were talking about. We want a small business owner because we were talking about, can they even afford to have employees working and living in the same community? We wanted an expert in energy because we knew that, yes, we wanted green housing, but at what cost did that apply? Is that another geos that needs to grow some more? Is that something we should be pushing, less gas in boilers versus electric? And then there was a cost associated to it. We brought in a realtor. Oh, what is the market? Is the market going to even take any housing stock, and what is that spectrum? And then the last thing was bringing in a nonprofit who actually reaches into different levels of our community. Community table was a thought when you have built bridges to opportunities. That was put up intentionally that way. We purposely designed it that way so it'd have a spectrum. Somehow this evolved to all about being affordable, and that was never the intention. And we go back to recordings, you probably can hear this conversation. So I do like that you removed affordable out of all this. I don't want to change the makeup of it because the council then agreed on that. I'm a little disappointed in section 3A that we would go and point back. I get that laws will tell us to do certain things and we can have that, but I would add in the first page a section that needs to look at the spectrum of housing stock. That was the intentions of this. I wanted to know, is it a good policy to have gated communities throughout the city? Is that a good policy? Instead, I was waiting for each person to come up and propose a gated community, but no one can answer the question, is it good policy for us to have a gated community? No one can answer that question. So I thought it'd be good to have a diverse committee to kind of explore the idea. Is it okay? Is it something we'd want to do? Tiny homes, because the tap question came up. We sat here and struggled with taps because it's the tap to each tiny home. How much those taps cost? Well, we talked about, should we do a tap and then it splits? Remember, that was a conversation. The Housing Advisory Committee was to talk about some of these things, to bring it to council and advise us on what makes sense. And then we would say where to go for the staff to take it. You know, building codes, I get it. I think we need, when the building codes get there, we do the minimum of what we need to do at the state and let us kind of go from there. Just what's the minimum and what else is above the minimum? Because the building codes can get out of control. We can do like Louisville did, and then it got too high to rebuild, you know, the whole from the Marshall fires, and they had to go back to their old codes to just get those passed. I don't want to be in that situation. But that, I just want to make sure we're all level setting on the purpose of this, because if we're just going to go and say this is a homeless housing guy, then I'm against this committee completely, because that's not the intentions of this committee at all. That's not why it was proposed
May I
by
just
by myself and Lisa.
just to provide a little bit of, for everybody to know, the housing strategic plan was just adopted. So I just want to say that's what they spent the first year of their time. That is all they did.
Yeah.
So that is just coming to completion. So this conversation is really timely. I think we really appreciate hearing all of this again. I wasn't here when the hack was initially created, so this is just really good insight for myself, for Carrie, and for Sam as we move forward. So that's all well and good, and we can take those issues up. It's not precluded, I think, in these bylaws. And if there are, again, these particular issues about a gated community, and ask me anytime, I'll give you my opinion.
Well, I mean, because we were making an exclusive community, and that's not what the sign said when I first ran for city council on Kipling in 58 said we're building an inclusive community.
Yes.
The sign's gone now, but it did say that. And when you put a gated community up, that's a different message we're trying to create. And it also could, and I'm not saying I'm against them. The policy question is we've never had it, and should we allow them? I mean, we did, but those are kind of things. And this tiny home thing that's been taking a while, I think it's finally moving dirt over here on 58th and Kipling. It's been a
Well,
couple of years since that's
I-
been approved.
I still think it's a good idea to base it on the needs assessment, because the needs assessment does go through, you know, the cost burden, the for sale market trends, future housing preferences, Arvada housing types, housing programs and policies. So I think it's covered.
Broad.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. I think the changes are excellent. It helps us identify, to Brad and Sharon's point, where the gaps may be that aren't necessarily affordable, but For instance, I think Sharon's point of senior ownership is spot on. Without we have a ton of seniors aging in place and we consistently hear, I'd love to downsize, but I can't afford anything. I can't sell and
Well,
buy
there's
something
nowhere to
new.
go.
Exactly.
Right, which is connected to starter homes, because they
Exactly.
are in those homes that would be people's
They would
starter
become the
homes.
family
if
homes
People
that the
could move out,
seniors
it's all
could downsize
connected.
as they wish
Yeah.
to. So even if they're not necessarily affordable senior homes, just having that product in the market to fill the need could free up some of this other stuff down chain. So agreed entirely. I like the changes. What I'm hearing from council is we like the proposed changes. Is there anything in particular else regarding the proposed changes in the document we want to see?
I proposed 2 edits about the makeup of the committee, not to change the makeup, but just to describe them differently. Take the word affordable off there twice.
Or maybe in our advocate for housing policy.
Whatever.
Or just say housing. Just say housing. But I don't know what you would call that housing, the affordable housing developer, because I think that's a special developer that does need to be at that table
It
that
is.
talks about LIHTC and all the other stuff.
So what's the definition of
I don't know.
affordable housing developer? Subsidized housing developer, maybe? How about that?
Or
You say
Or
the
the top,
tech or.
or LIHTC
Yeah.
specialist or something.
Like that.
Because I think the committee should know the challenges, because it's not always easy. Plus, you always want the D to be associated, so it's always, if you go down that path. I'm not smart around that stuff.
It
I'm
is.
sure they're not.
Something. So I like experience with like that.
But I want to add one other thing with the scope real quick before we close on this. Is the 55 active is something that's new, because we never had any, we just have people that are in memory care and retirement homes. So you kind of graduate from a home in your older neighborhood straight into a retirement home that is not necessarily for active folks. But the other thing is I mentioned tiny homes and gated, but the short-term rental thing is taking housing stock out from all levels. And so, that's something that needs to be in the scope. And that doesn't mean with the bylaws, but there's an impact. And there's a lot of cities now not allowed.
Well, we're gonna talk about that at six.
Yeah, I know. Right.
And I'm
But I just want to
excited about
prep you
that.
that
Yeah.
there's
I love
a
it.
tie. There's a tie.
Absolutely. There's absolutely a tie. Thank you.
So could I propose an edit that might address that? We could put another thing under section 3 that says, they can provide recommendation on any other housing topic as requested by council.
Yeah, I think so. I like that if we could, just because we don't know where the markets go on everything.
Yeah, that's why I like that this changes every 6 years. As I was saying to Shauna earlier, the issues facing Arvada in 36 years' time could be completely different than today. And we don't want to tie future council's hands.
But I think it's changed even since we formed this group.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts?
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for the feedback. I'll now turn it over to Sam. She's going to provide a presentation on a workforce housing opportunity.
And she's also gonna clarify the addresses, so you guys are clear on where we're
Yes.
talking about.
Yeah,
Is this
sorry,
one of
this
the-
is the Marshall Street parcel. This is the one, I think it's,
5045 Marshall Street.
Yeah.
This is what you might know it as. The legal address is what we included in the presentation.
Spano property, right?
yeah.
Yes.
So do you wanna, expand that?
I have ideas.
Slideshow, go from the beginning, please.
The left side over there, Kristen.
Yeah, perfect. There we go. All right.
I haven't shared it yet.
So hopefully this is a little more exciting than bylaws. So this is a proposal for that Marshall Street parcel that the city has owned since 2021. And I think we're really trying to figure out what the best use for it is. And I wanted to make a proposal that I think would align with city goals.
I love capturing the screen.
Oh, okay,
To share
no
with
problem.
Click share, yeah.
Right here. Okay, so if we go
Then I think if you click
from the
from
beginning, right here. up.
I think it'll, with it from beginning, it'll disappear.
Do it again.
There you go.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem. All right, so we wanna click to the next slide. I put it on this slide. We just jump to the next slide. All right, so just to give a little bit of background, this is going to filter into a larger strategy, which we identified in the strategic plan that was adopted in May of 2024. One of those plans is the land banking strategy, which was to allocate publicly owned land and or acquire more properties for the purposes of affordable and mixed income housing. Quick note, affordable does have a definition. It is a legal definition. It was established in 1934. And that definition is housing that costs the occupants no more than 30% of their gross adjusted income, including utilities. So this affordable housing can be market rate housing. It can be housing that is subsidized. It can be voucher housing. All that it is a relationship of income to housing costs. So that is the official definition. But yes, sure.
So then it is personal.
It is.
Affordability is personal.
It is
so
personal,
that's-
but like all financial metrics, if you're making $1 million a year and you're spending 70% of your income on housing, that 30% ratio doesn't really matter as much anymore.
Right, it's a
Technically,
personal choice.
yeah, that's a personal choice. So technically by HUD and the US government's definition, you are cost burdened, but you're making $1 million a year. So you still have $300,000 a year to live on. So no one's really gonna worry about you. The reason that affordability is kind of heavily associated with that under 80% AMI bracket is because that's where having that cutoff really matters. And that's where HUD limits its subsidization programs. So that's kind of where it comes from. And it's really confusing because there's an official definition, and there's policy definitions, and there's practice definitions, and then there's municipality definitions. But for the purposes of the housing assessments, the definition that was being used was the residents of Arvada are not paying more than 30% of their gross income in their housing costs.
And Sam, does that mean regardless of the situation? So that's one person who makes minimum wage.
Household income.
So
if
the
it,
household of one, it's a household of one.
if it's a household of one, if it's a household of one, if it's two roommates, then that's two households living together. And if they're paying more than 30% of their individual income in their half of the rent, then they're still considered cost burdened by the US government. So there is a definition. So one of the things that we took from the housing assessment was that the populations in Arvada who were cost burdened were in that, really it was 50% AMI and lower, but it kind of flexed a little bit up to 80% AMI and lower. Those were the people, the residents of Arvada who were considered cost burdened under the technical definition of the US government. And the unfortunate thing about housing assessments is unless you want to go and not spend millions of dollars and knock on everybody's door and get everybody's individual exact situation, we're relying on census data, the American Community Survey. We can drill into things like housing churn rate, but we're painting with a very wide brush, again, unless we want to spend millions of dollars on a housing assessment and literally just ask everyone. So this is what we came up with for strategy 2, is that people who were earning below this particular threshold, 80% AMI, were underserved. So one of our strategies was to leverage the publicly owned land to set it aside for affordable housing and mixed income housing. Mixed income housing could mean some market rate units, some voucher units, some subsidized units, some income restricted units. It's just a plethora of things. That kind of bled a little bit into the city council strategic plan, the housing section. It was focused on, again, on what the housing assessment found, which again, housing assessment, very broad strokes, but this is just what we found was true with the residents of Arvada. And then finally, this bleeds into the highly popular land banking grant and Prop 123 funding sources that are kind of going around. Land banking is very big right now. Land in Colorado, particularly if you're in the Denver metro area, it's very valuable. So a lot of cities and municipalities are trying to take land and set it aside to meet the needs of this underserved population, which again is informed by their housing assessments. Problem. These grants are highly competitive. They are oversubscribed, which means everybody wants money and there's just not enough to go around. And grantors will like to see past successes. This is true just in grant writing in general. One of your strongest arguments for getting money from a grantor is, hey, if you give me this money, I've done this before. I have a track record of success. I am a safe person for you to give your money to. And finally, for Prop 123 in particular, if awarded, the city is going to have to retain ownership of the land itself. So just so you know, before we came here, I submitted our application for Prop 123 for a parcel in Old Town Arvada. If we are granted the money to purchase this property and the purchase does go through, Chafa would like to see us retain ownership of at least the land long-term. So I'm just giving you this as sort of background information as we go into the proposal. Can we jump to the next slide, please? Great. So how do we retain ownership if we are not a developer or a unit operator? So we are going to use this thing called a ground lease. So ground lease is pretty simple. The city retains ownership of the land, but the developer will own the building and the infrastructure. So fair warning, there is a little bit of additional liability that the city would take on for this, as opposed to selling or donating, which is what the city has been doing. But this is not a new concept. It exists in planning. It exists in municipalities, preservation efforts. So a good ground lease should be able to shift most of that liability to where it belongs onto the developer who will actually be owning, operating, and developing the property. So then there's a rent and payment structure. So capitalized ground lease is a little bit different from a normal lease in that there is one large upfront payment, generally based on some proportion of the value of the land. And then there are going to be annual nominal payments of, you could do $100 a year, you could do $1,000 a year. But the idea behind it is it's really just to keep the lease active and not necessarily to create revenue, because the revenue actually happened during the capitalization payment. So these terms are usually longer than affordability compliance periods. Investors in particular like to see 75 to 99 years, although you could probably get one to agree to a 50-year period, which is great for the city because it is we can ensure long-term control of the property. So if we want affordability on the property, affordability as defined by 30% of the occupant's income and targeting a particular income level, we can do that. If we decide that that is no longer necessary as the ground leaseholder, we can remove that. It's just sort of an as needed thing. Some benefits is we can leverage the value of the land while also building more housing on it. We can use those capitalized ground lease payments to help us purchase more land and create a multiplier effect without tapping into city funds. We can make the city an attractive candidate for land banking grants. So again, taking money from other sources, not the city, and using it, leveraging it, and creating more with it, and also gives us long-term control. And we can set benchmarks in the pre-development period, and we can ensure affordability if needed, following the end of the compliance periods. So, jump out to the next slide, please. Okay, so again, more definitions before we get to the proposal, because I want to make sure that the proposal makes sense to everyone. So what is workforce housing? This is the question that has beleaguered many advisory committees in the state of Colorado, but technically speaking, based on funding sources, workforce housing is affordable, so that general definition of affordable, for occupants earning between 80 and 120% of area median income. So in Jefferson County, if you're in a two-person household, that means that your household income, if you're 80%, it's $83,520 per year for a two-person household. And if 100% is $104,400. One of my favorite things about Jefferson County is that because it's around $100,000, it's very easy to figure this out off the top of my head. So who lives in workforce housing? Municipal employees, police officers, nurses, EMTs, teachers, apprentice tradesmen. Basically, another sort of like entry-level professional people or tradespeople live in these houses.
Where did you get that information?
Hmm?
Where did you get that information?
Just based on average salaries.
Just based on salary?
Yeah, based on salaries.
So an apprentice tradesman makes almost $150,000 a year.
In some areas, yes.
In this area, yes.
In this particular area.
Yeah, so that, I guess,
I mean, sheet metal doesn't make that much.
no, but,
I mean, it depends on the trade.
yeah, it depends on
Yeah.
the trade. But, yeah, I'm just looking at that. I have like 10 questions I want to ask, but I just
Yeah.
wondered where that, if we could just like give us some, perspective or just ideas of where you get that data, that'd be very helpful to me.
Sure. This is basically just general salary data. But I could be happy to send you some salaries. I can also send you a section of the housing assessment, which demonstrated that there is no industry in Arvada that at 1.5 times the median salary, so that's accounting for a two-person household where somebody can purchase a house if they work in Arvada. If they have the median salary and their partner or their other household member earns 50% of their salary.
Well, that's how we built Arvada, so, yeah, there isn't any industry in it.
Yeah, so
So that's how we built it, so I can understand that.
yeah, so, we're not, but we're not talking about, working from home, financial professionals. We're not talking about, computer engineers. We're talking about, working people who have, service industry type jobs for the community.
So service industry.
Service
Okay, I just wanna make-
So service industry, if you have a two-person household, but only if you have a two-person household. What are the benefits to workforce housing? So one of the more interesting findings, I thought it was in the 2024 housing assessment, we found that Arvada's housing stock is only 30% rental. And at a median, so now it's $650,000 for a median house price, but in the housing assessment, it was still 600. So to purchase a house in Arvada, you need to make almost $200,000 per year in your household income. So obviously that is, so the takeaway that I had was if you want to move to Arvada and work here, you almost have to buy. And if you're gonna buy, you're very likely going to need to be able to afford a house that is around $600,000. Now, can you find cheaper houses? Absolutely, 600 was the median. But that is sort of the reality that some of Arvada's employers are looking at when they have stated to us that they have had difficulty recruiting, retaining junior and entry-level employees. So this housing would be something that we would have to try to meet some of those needs. We've heard this from the Arvada Chamber of Commerce that has the whole BOLD initiative surrounding workforce housing. Carrie has had conversations with the Arvada Police Department about this. And again, no industry in Arvada that is based in Arvada has a median salary high enough to allow workers to buy a home. So, Kristen, do you mind? Next slide, please.
Before we move on, Linda, we had a hard stop at 5.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah, we're almost done, actually.
Okay. Just wanted.
Thank
All
you.
right, so this is a pretty simple proposal. I am proposing, with Carrie's support and, the city manager's office, that we take a look at this parcel, the Marshall Street parcel, to build workforce housing targeting 80 to 100% AMI. So how is this gonna work? Well, we competitively procure a developer to build the project. The developer is going to be responsible for finding the money, including our system development fees. Community outreach, which is going to kind of be more of a co-responsibility with the city, because we have, we want to make sure that the community is on board with this plan. Once it's built, building, operating, and managing the project, and having 100% ownership of the improvements on the land. So we own the land underneath, they own the building. And what is the city's role? Well, we are going to provide the land at a slightly discounted price through a long-term capitalized ground lease, which is a part of our land banking strategy. We are going to provide a prioritized design review, which is really low-hanging fruit for how we can reduce the cost of development, is by expediting some design review. Doesn't cost us anything. We can also aid in providing community outreach, and we have some other possible roles, which really is just going to depend on whether or not the project needs it. We can help procure financing through grants offered to municipalities. We just did this with Marshall Point. We can structure a capitalized ground lease in a favorable way. So maybe they can't really make a big payment until year 5. We say, okay, fine, you can make smaller payments up until year 5, and then you give us the big payment at year 5. We can provide a loan from the Arvada Affordable Housing Fund. This was something that the HAC was very passionate about, was including loans to properties that don't just serve low-income households. Also, if needed, SLP participation. But again, these are possible roles. They don't necessarily have to come to fruition. And, we get the city benefits, we get more additional housing stock where rents are tied to income long-term, which is, if you've been following the trends for the last 40 years, housing costs have gone like this and incomes have gone like this, which is kind of how we got into this mess to begin with. The United States is currently 2 million housing units short, which is why we have so many such a dire housing crisis. And we can leverage a resource that was actually initially purchased for grant funds and unlock some of the value of the land while also providing housing. So if we want to jump to the next slide.
So I want to make sure the council has time to ask questions.
Okay, so very quickly, about the parcel, American Rescue Plans, we are not doing traditional affordable under 80% AMI on this parcel because we cannot use LIHTC funds, because we have 2 LIHTC projects that are currently under construction in this area. And it's also part of the Newtown sub-area plan, which, Kristen, if you just want to show them the last page, which shows that we actually have a sub-area plan for this entire neighborhood. And this particular development, I think, would fit well. Something that was looking for was development opportunities with higher densities. So last slide, please. Okay, so what are we doing? We want your feedback. We want to develop a community engagement plan. We will definitely need to hire an attorney to write an ironclad ground lease if we are going to go down this road. We want to determine what can feasibly be built on the property. We're estimating 100 to 150 units just based on zoning and taking a look at Marshall Point as a sort of like a benchmark. And then we release a request for proposals, which is very important to note that if we do not get an acceptable proposal, we can just say no. And that is the workforce proposal.
So really what we're looking at now is for council's feedback on whether you're supportive of this idea. We're certainly not saying that this is, we need a lot more information first before we can put together more context behind this proposal. But before we start having conversations with others to gather that information. We want to make sure that everyone is supportive of us moving down this path to bring back additional information down the road.
I have a couple of questions. Just to,
So
just
what-
to have a few clarity points.
Sure.
With the ground lease and we own the land. For future development, say, you know, it's a 99-year ground lease, the building's done after 60 years, the developer wants to redevelop. They don't get a use by right because we're the landowner. Any and everything they want to do has to go through us, correct? Even if it's within zoning.
That is correct.
And then in addition, if there are things within the ground itself that are discovered, when we go to excavate, which is not always, or not unheard of, I would say. Do we own that or do they own that to clean it up?
So that would be something that we would work through with
So, yeah.
with an attorney.
Okay.
So ideally, the redevelopment of the land, including environmental mitigation, would be something that we would try to tie to the improvements of the land and not in the ownership of the land itself.
Okay, and then my final question then is often when developers come to us to do projects, we require right-of-way improvements, et cetera, to the adjacent road. Is that still possible with a ground lease or are they absolved of that since they don't own the adjacent land parcel?
So we can push whatever we want onto them. It just really depends on how the ground lease is written.
Okay.
So if it's, so we own the land underneath, so really the only thing we are in charge of is what the land can be used for, what the improvements on the land. They would technically own the infrastructure, the buildings, and they would be ultimately responsible for it. But again, need an attorney to make sure this is ironclad.
And the environmental contamination that was there has been cleaned up?
So I don't think that there is anything on the land to my knowledge. When, I don't know when we purchased it, if we found anything.
I thought it was remediated, but
I believe it's been remediated.
Okay.
It's been remediated except for one maybe small area where the chemical feed building was. We might have to do some additional
Mhm.
surveys there.
But that
Sharon,
could
did
be a
you-
part of
I have
the,
like a whole
Yeah.
litany of questions. I don't think we have time for them.
Oh, boy.
Did I send them to Carrie for answers and send them to you? Okay, yeah, I have a whole bunch of questions. Like, have you been out there?
to the parcel.
Hmm?
Yeah, we've been to the parcel.
Would you live there?
I think it depends. I think that
No.
Hmm?
Would you live there?
I'm the wrong person to ask. I lived in Manhattan and I lived in Boston. So, yes, absolutely, I would live there.
Okay, I just wondered because I didn't feel like it was like the most desirable place to live. I did a ride along with one of our police officers and he was sharing with me because Clear Creek Trail kind of breaks off there. You can go to Wheat Ridge, you can come to Arvada,
Mhm.
almost come to Arvada. So there's a possibility that we would have that issue. I just, part of that is the neighborhood. There's those 6 apartment complexes that are there, that are, I would characterize as low income housing. I would like to see us do some sort of master planning in that area because it's kind of a food desert. I mean, unless
It
you
totally
go,
is.
if you go to Costco or something like that, and you can catch a bus to get there. But there could be opportunity for a small little something there. What I want to make sure that it does not turn into is, that somehow we get somebody in there, they ignore it for 60 years. We haven't done any improvements as a city in that area. That's why I'm suggesting a master plan for that area. That we start densifying low income and then it looks like redlining. So I want to make sure that we don't do
So
that.
that is one of the reasons I am not proposing any affordable traditional, any affordable in terms of like heavily subsidized, federally subsidized property. I think that the reason I'm going with workforce here and not a light tech project or an affordable project also has to do with income diversification of the neighborhood. Hopefully, we do have a sub area plan that for this particular area, for this community. So hopefully it will densify. We are getting 260 units at Marshall Point.
Right.
And we're getting 85 units at Marshall Street Landing.
Right.
I do not think it is a great idea to put more low-income housing in. I think workforce where where households are earning, between $80,000 and $100,000 a year might bring some income diversity into the area. And as for, do I think people would live there? Do I think I would live there? So I know I would live there, but
I just can't see a cop living. I can't see a cop living,
But
but
with the Marshall Point project going in, it's
Yeah.
going in just a block north. I think we'll start to see that area
Yeah.
turn a bit with.
and you're not gonna see commercial businesses move into the area unless they have a consumer base.
well, I do know somebody who's getting ready to buy a warehouse there. So that's why I am proposing, and I will sit down with Jessica and talk to her about this. More of a master plan look of and feel for this that really brings this into an Arvada feel for, bless you, less than, for a lack of a better term. So that that whole area feels like it is a part of Arvada and not just here we go. And we hope you're happy with this. I would like to see us be more thoughtful than just this little plot of land. I would like us to dream big and deliver. And I feel like this little area, while it's a start, if we could actually take that area, talk to Ara and make it a master plan. And
Do you mean a more thorough master plan than the plan that exists?
I don't know about the plan that exists.
Sub-area plan
Yeah.
already.
Oh, that
So
one.
so this actually does fit into that plan, that was already,
So-
so if you wanna go back 2 or 3 slides.
Well, no, because we
We
have to
of
move on.
course.
So I will sit with Jessica
Yeah.
and you, of course. I don't wanna do this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I am also interested in how the development will work because I do know there's like Section 8 housing already in the majority of it. So how, if we're so that's the sub-area plan, Sharon.
Yeah, right.
That
Mhm.
slashed orange there
Right.
is mixed use,
Right.
right? So
Part of that is actual
Right.
businesses.
yeah. So I am interested in like how we are going to be developing it without like gentrification, losing that Section 8 housing, like the low naturally occurring affordable housing area that the most of that block is.
Okay, so
Already-
you'd like to see it coupled with like a NOAA strategy?
Right.
We could do that.
Yeah, and then I also don't need an answer now, but do we have success stories using Prop 123 already? Or would this be like the first project that if we got it off, this would be like, see, we got Prop 123 and
This is not Prop 123. So the reason I brought up Prop 123 is because I have submitted applications for Prop 123.
right,
And if we are awarded Prop 123 dollars for land banking, this program's only been around for 2 years, so we
Oh,
don't
okay.
really see
So
those
it's
type
too early.
stories. But if we're awarded those fundings, we do have to use those funds in tandem with some kind of land banking strategy because there's a lot of restrictions for who could apply for a land banking grant. So I can't just hand it to a developer. I can't
right.
donate it. I can't even sell it, frankly.
I was just wondering if this could be used as like, see, when we have land, we do awesome stuff with it. like
That's
that.
what, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
That
asking.
would be okay.
Point here is we want to make sure that the resources that we have, even if it's not Prop 123 related, we're using those
Okay.
because we are motivated to do more in terms of housing in Arvada.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from the council?
The 100 to 150 units
That's purely on zoning.
would take up the whole face of that property.
It would take up most of the space of the
Like
property.
3 acres, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a little over 3 acres.
50 units an acre.
Right, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
So, but it is very close to Marshall Point, which I believe is like 5 acres and it's gonna be 260 units and 5 stories. So,
But that's a different housing
Mhm.
strategy, correct?
so
Because this is going to be market or for workforce. Marshall Point and Marshall Landing
So
are a
Marshall-
different concept.
Yeah, but Marshall.
Yeah, so I don't want to
Marshall
mix our metaphors here.
Mhm.
So,
What's the difference?
So Marshall Point is using LIHTC funding, and LIHTC comes with a income restriction that all of the units together have to average to 60% AMI, and that's a HUD restriction. Marshall Street Landing is what's called permanent supportive housing, which is going to be 100% project-based voucher. So the vouchers are actually what's going to be paying the rent. So
they're not the same.
That's the family tree.
yeah, that's the family tree. That's sort of a nonprofit, sort of case management rehabilitation.
But you're bringing it up because you're bringing up the densification in this light industrial side of town, that there's
Yes.
gonna be more people, and with more people, there's gonna be more industry, more places where people are gonna wanna
Yeah.
live. More jobs, more
Yeah, and that
transportation needs.
Jobs over there, so it
Yeah.
would be additional workforce for
Yeah.
those jobs.
So just a couple of comments. The first one would be, have we given up on a navigation center there? Is that already done? Because that's what that was originally purchased for. And
I have thoughts
I would-
about that I'll
I
share
would
with Jessica.
suggest that we hold our horses until we
Mhm.
settle that question.
I agree.
That rather than precluding it with something like this.
I agree.
So that's one concern. The second concern, not concern, but question I would have is, you've got a concept that includes the subsidy for the developer coming from the value of the land that comes from a federal grant or from the city in some way or whatever, without knowing, some more specifics, doesn't have to be specific, but some more specifics of how big a subsidy are you talking about to give a developer? Because I think this doesn't get done without subsidy. There's no, because if it would, it'd be being done all over the place, because as you articulate, there's a need for it, there's a market for it, but obviously it makes no sense without subsidy. And so I would want to know, what's the city of Arvada into this property for, and the sources of that money. I understand we bought it with some federal grant.
ARPA, American Rescue Plan.
And did we do all the environmental remediation and the demolition with ARPA funds, or was that city funds? Is there a mixing of funds there? I suspect there is, I don't know. You would know that better than I would. And so, then the whole plan is important to me, unless, if we've given up on any possibility of locating homeless services there. And we're really within the rules to be able to give away ARPA money or
We are.
rescue plan.
So that is something we did.
We're okay to give that away, and the taxpayers get held at least harmless on the money that the taxpayers put into that, which I suspect, I don't know for sure, but it's the demolition, environmental remediation, everything that is taken, the carrying costs, everything that's taken up to now. Provided all those things happen, then I'm willing to entertain it, but I would be interested to know, who's getting subsidized and how much are they getting subsidized?
Okay, so
Talk about the
priority
source
for you
of it.
would be to recapture the carrying costs of having had the land for the last 3 years.
Well, I think all of these things, all of these things matter. And then, like Sharon, I would be, interested or concerned on exactly what gets built there. So, when you talk about 100 to 150 units on 3 acres, I mean, that's gonna look just like the Marshall Point stuff across the street. Well, if the best way of subsidizing housing is through LIHTC funding, I don't know why we wouldn't pose this as a
Because
developer. to bring
we're
LIHTC.
ineligible for LIHTC funding due to concentration of poverty issues in that particular areas. And again, we don't want to create.
So-
Yeah, we don't want to.
So, but
That's already that.
So,
but-
yeah, it's there.
But we're somewhat creating that by, it might be one step above, instead of 60% AMI, it's 80% of AMI, but I don't see a giant difference there. And I think, if the federal rules are you can't concentrate poverty into one area, I don't think us concentrating the poverty into one area necessarily makes that much more sense either. So I would have concerns about that. So that gets to the details of exactly, you know, what is somebody gonna build and how and what, and that's a whole bunch of details that obviously aren't available now, but when they came up, I would be interested in those. So those are kind of.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important to note that we can throw an RFP, a request for proposals out there. And if we get something back that is not to our liking, we are fully within our rights to say, actually, no one gets it. So on that end, that is something that can be slightly mitigated.
One other last thing, and then I'll shut up. Sorry, Brett. The last thing is you mentioned in one of your slides, one of the possibilities of additional subsidy by the city is the special limited partner, and I would definitely be against that. You know, because the residential down there already, the new ones are not gonna pay to the fire department. They're not gonna pay to the school district. They're not gonna pay to the county. They're not gonna pay, granted, our small mill levy to us. They're not gonna pay to any of the special districts. But yet, because it's housing and it's gonna have a bunch of people in it, there's certainly costs to all of those entities of that being there. So we've done that already. I would encourage us not to just blanket use that as a giveaway every chance we can, just because we can. I think it's important for us to think about the services that are gonna be provided in that area, that the people that live in that area pay for the services that they receive in that area.
That's a great point. So Randy, then Bob, then Brad, because those are the order in which I saw the hands.
Just really quick, to John's point, I'm not willing to take off the table yet to use this property as a possibility for a navigation center, so I still want to explore
Agreed.
that.
And just to be clear, I'm not against a navigation center. Neither Carrie nor I are against navigation center. We would love to see a navigation center built there. We just wanted to make sure that council was aware that there are other options if the navigation center doesn't happen. This is just an option, obviously, navigation center. We would love a navigation center there.
So I don't want to prescribe, that's what you about, we should get to the plan first on the homeless. So I'd rather first work through the homeless plan and have a strategy document, because we do not have one adopted, but yet we're solutioning something that has no plan. So I would recommend that we hold on this, get through our homeless strategy plan and get it adopted, so it gives us focus. And then decide, and I'm okay holding it for another year or two, so we make the right decision, because once we build on it, there's no going back. So I would recommend that we get through, I saw the timeline, I think I'm good with the timeline that GBH something. Yeah, as proposed, and start there. We know this is an option. You know, and it is interesting, because you're right, we do not want to create a corridor of low income, and I absolutely agree with that. And I think mixed use is better for business as well. But I also want to keep in mind, so we should get through this plan, understand this is an option. We do have it as mixed use. I worry about it being a food desert.
Yep.
A little bit for those that may not have a vehicle, you know, for grocery store specifically, or a small. So if we even went down this path, I would look for something that would be definitely mixed use and not 100%, because there has to be something that gives food in that area, not a liquor store across the street, you know, so,
Indeed.
you know, that.
Rose Bakery is right across the street. It's really good.
Capacity might not be there, but.
Yeah, but so I think we need to look more holistically, and I think we're okay to bank this for a little while longer as we get through a strategy plan and then adopt it. Then we can decide which way we should go. I appreciate that, because I think it's very valid. You have a very good proposal. We also are trying to delicately get through this homeless strategy, and we need to kind of push through that. And there's some politics around it, so we just need to work with our partners and figure out how we're gonna get there once we have a plan.
Yes.
Once we have a plan.
I will say, regardless of however this specific site moves forward, once we have a plan,
Yeah.
I think this is a fascinating idea, very worthy of exploration on potential other areas. I recognize this parcel's value in proving the case study for future $1, $2, $3, which is why this particular parcel is in discussion. But whatever potentially happens with this parcel, then I still like the idea of exploring the ground lease option further.
So you put the idea of floating the RFP out there, and I just would be really careful in doing that, because I think that's way ahead of where we
Yeah,
are.
That's far
So-
down the track, but this was more to address Councilman Marriott's point that we don't have a ton of control, we don't know all the details, and that is to say that so we don't have a development department, we don't have architecture, we don't have architects, we don't have engineers who would be able to do SketchUp, do a mock-up, and build exactly what could be built there. I just do the financing piece. So if we got so if we got to the point where we're like, okay, let's see if we know what we want to do. Let's see if we can get a decent proposal in. If we don't get a decent proposal, I just wanted to make sure that council was also aware is that we could tell everyone to go pound sand if we wanted to.
So I'm hearing that we're going to table this.
Yes, please.
Yes, but don't throw it away. I
Yeah,
think
no,
it's really
don't.
good.
Thank you for the work on it.
Yeah, thank you for the work on it.
Thank you. All
All right, thank you.
right, so I will adjourn us from our study session. Council grabs food and try to be back in here with it by 5:20.